Microsoft did not win PC gaming by being the best choice. It won by being the only choice. For more than 30 years, PC gaming and Windows were treated as the same thing. Not because gamers loved Windows, but because Microsoft made sure there was no real alternative. Want to play games on a PC? Install Windows. End of discussion. That is how Microsoft built its gaming empire. Every major game was designed around Windows. Every graphics driver was optimized for Windows. Every tool developers used assumed Windows by default. If you stepped outside that ecosystem, things quietly broke. Performance dropped, features disappeared, support vanished. Linux gaming was not just difficult, it was dismissed. Tech forums mocked it, developers ignored it. Anyone who suggested Linux for gaming was treated like a hobbyist, not a serious player. A few enthusiasts tried anyway, using compatibility layers like Wine, but the experience was painful. Games crashed, performance lagged, many titles refused to launch at all. You could spend hours tweaking files just to reach a menu, only for the game to freeze minutes later. Mac was never a real option either. So Microsoft had what every company dreams of, a monopoly that did not look like one. Gamers paid for Windows licenses, accepted forced updates, and lived with whatever Microsoft decided to bundle into the operating system. There was no leverage, no escape. Then something unexpected happened. A small handheld gaming device shattered that assumption. In February 2022, Steam Deck launched, and it did not run Windows. It ran Linux, not a modified Windows shell, not a dual boot workaround. Linux. That alone should have killed it. Instead, it exploded. The Steam Deck proved something Microsoft had spent decades avoiding. Windows was never required for PC gaming. It was just enforced. Modern games ran smoothly. Load times improved, battery life benefited, and gamers suddenly experienced PC gaming without Windows licenses, background services, or forced system changes. Behind this was something Microsoft never took seriously. Valve had been building a compatibility layer called Proton for years, quietly, methodically. While Microsoft focused on pushing telemetry and platform control, Valve focused on making games simply work. The results stunned the industry. Nearly 90% of Windows games now run on Linux through Proton. Many of them run just as well, some run better, and suddenly Microsoft was no longer the gatekeeper. That is when the panic set in. Microsoft began scrambling to retrofit Windows 11 for handheld gaming. Performance optimizations, interface redesigns, sudden interest in gaming efficiency, none of it came from innovation, it came from fear. Because once gamers see that Windows is optional, Microsoft loses its leverage. This moment is not about a handheld console, it is about the first real crack in Microsoft's control over PC gaming in more than 20 years. And monopolies do not survive exposure, they survive silence. That silence is gone. Proton is based on Wine, the decades-old translation layer that attempts to run Windows software on Linux. But Valve did not just use Wine as it was. They invested heavily in development, hired top engineers, and optimized it specifically for gaming performance. They partnered with Codeweavers, the company behind Crossover, to accelerate development. They contributed thousands of improvements back to the open source community. Instead of requiring users to manually configure settings for each game, troubleshoot driver issues, or edit registry files, Proton handles everything automatically behind the scenes. You click install on a game in your Steam library, you click play, and the game just works. No terminal commands, no configuration files, no technical knowledge required. On paper, it sounded promising. In practice, it was revolutionary. When Steam Deck launched in February 2022, thousands of Windows-exclusive games ran flawlessly on Linux. Not just playable, not just functional, but flawlessly. Games like Elden Ring, Spider-Man, God of War, even demanding modern titles like Cyberpunk 2077, all running on a Linux handheld at console-quality frame rates. Gamers who received their Steam Decks were shocked. Reddit forums exploded with disbelief. YouTube was flooded with benchmark videos proving it actually worked. This was not supposed to be possible. Linux was supposed to be the operating system for servers and developers, not gamers. Yet here it was, running the latest MLA games without breaking a sweat. Microsoft's first response was dismissive. Internally, they likely assumed Steam Deck would be a niche product for hardcore Linux enthusiasts, the same tiny community that had been trying to make Linux gaming work for 20 years. They probably thought it would sell a few 100,000 units at most, capture some headlines, and then fade into obscurity like every other Linux gaming initiative before it. But the sales numbers told a completely different story. By the end of 2022, Steam Deck had sold 1.62 million units. Every single one of those devices was running Linux instead of Windows. That is 1.62 million Windows licenses that Microsoft did not sell. 1.62 million gamers who proved they did not need Microsoft's operating system. Here's what makes this terrifying for Microsoft. Out of the entire handheld gaming PC market, including devices from Asus, Lenovo, and MSI that run Windows, Steam Deck accounts for roughly 48 to 50% of all sales. That means half of the handheld gaming market chose Linux over Windows, not because they are technical experts, but because the user experience is simply better. You probably think compatibility is still an issue. After all, Windows has tens of thousands of games. How many could Linux really support? According to Proton DB, a crowdsourced database that tracks game compatibility on Linux, nearly 90% of Windows games now run on Linux through Proton. Not 50%, not 70%, 90%. Let that number sink in for a moment. 9 out of 10 games designed exclusively for Windows now work on a completely different operating system. Proton DB categorizes games into tiers. Platinum-rated games run perfectly with zero configuration. Gold-rated games require minor tweaks. Silver games are playable despite some flaws. When you add up Platinum and Gold ratings, the data shows that the vast majority of tested games work without serious issues. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Many of these games do not just work on Linux, they actually run better than they do on Windows. Independent benchmarks have shown that certain titles experience faster load times, smoother frame pacing, and fewer stutters on SteamOS compared to Windows 11. Part of this comes down to overhead. Windows 11 runs constant background processes, telemetry services, Windows Defender scans, automatic updates, and Copilot AI features. All of that consumes system resources even when you are trying to play a game. SteamOS, by contrast, is stripped down. It boots directly into a gaming interface. No bloatware, no forced updates interrupting your session, no telemetry reporting your activity back to Microsoft. Just games, running as efficiently as possible. Now you might be wondering, if Linux gaming works so well, why has not everyone switched already? The answer is momentum and familiarity. Most people have used Windows their entire lives. Switching to a new operating system feels risky, especially if you are not technically inclined. But Steam Deck removed that barrier. Users do not need to install drivers, configure settings, or troubleshoot compatibility issues. They turn on the device, log into Steam, and start playing. It is as simple as a console, but with the flexibility of a PC. And now, other companies are taking notice. In January 2025, Lenovo announced the Legion Go S, and the first third-party handheld officially licensed to ship with SteamOS. This is a massive development. It means Valve is no longer the only company offering a Linux-based gaming handheld. Other manufacturers are lining up to partner with Valve, and if that trend continues, SteamOS could become the dominant operating system for handheld gaming within the next few years. Microsoft sees this threat clearly now. In mid-2025, reports emerged that Microsoft had been working on a completely redesigned version of Windows 11 optimized specifically for handheld devices. This new interface boots directly into a full-screen gaming layer, similar to Xbox's interface, bypassing the traditional Windows desktop entirely. The bloat has been removed. The UI is controller-friendly, performance has been prioritized over background services. This is not a coincidence. Microsoft is reacting directly to Steam Deck's success. They are trying to prove that Windows can offer the same streamlined experience as SteamOS. But here's the problem. Even with these optimizations, Windows still carries legacy baggage. Telemetry, forced updates, and background services are built into the core of the operating system. SteamOS does not have those constraints because it was designed from the ground up for gaming, not for enterprise productivity or data collection. The broader implications of this shift extend beyond handhelds. Steam's hardware survey, which tracks the operating systems used by gamers, shows that Linux usage on Steam has crossed 3.2% as of November 2025. That might sound small, but it represents a record high and consistent month-over-month growth. 3 years ago, when the Steam Deck launched, Linux accounted for just 1% of Steam users. The growth is undeniable. Why does 3.2% matter? Because it represents a tipping point. When a platform crosses 3%, developers and hardware manufacturers start paying attention. Games that previously ignored Linux support are now testing Proton compatibility before launch. Peripheral manufacturers are ensuring their controllers, headsets, and accessories work with SteamOS. The ecosystem is becoming self-sustaining. Consider what happens when a gamer buys a Steam Deck and realizes their entire library works perfectly on Linux. They start questioning why they need Windows at all. Maybe their next desktop build uses Linux. Maybe they recommend SteamOS to friends. This is not just about handhelds. It is about proving that gaming on Linux is viable. And once that mental barrier breaks, Microsoft loses leverage. Microsoft's worst-case scenario is already playing out. Millions of gamers are choosing a Linux-based device over Windows. Proton compatibility is approaching near universal coverage. Third-party manufacturers are adopting SteamOS, and Microsoft's response, a redesigned Windows 11 interface, feels reactive rather than innovative. There is also a timing issue. Microsoft ended support for Windows 10 in October 2025, leaving approximately 240 million devices facing an upgrade decision. Many of those users do not want to move to Windows 11 because of its hardware requirements, intrusive telemetry, and mandatory Microsoft account integration. For the first time, Linux represents a legitimate alternative for those users, especially if they primarily use their computers for gaming. Imagine a scenario where a gamer's Windows 10 PC reaches the end of life. They do not want to pay for a Windows 11 license. They do not want to deal with forced updates and Copilot AI features they never asked for. They look at SteamOS, see that 90% of their Steam library is compatible, and realize they can install Linux for free. That is not a hypothetical anymore. That is happening right now. So what can you actually do with this information? If you are using Windows and you are curious about SteamOS or Linux gaming, here's the reality. You do not need to wipe your entire system immediately. You can dual boot Linux alongside Windows, which lets you keep both operating systems and choose which one to use when you start your computer. Distributions like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, and Pop! OS are beginner-friendly and support Proton through Steam. If you want the full Steam Deck experience without buying the hardware, you can install SteamOS on compatible devices, or try Bazite, a community-built Linux distribution optimized for gaming that mimics SteamOS's interface. Installation guides are widely available online, and the process has become significantly easier over the past few years. For those who want to stick with Windows, but reduce its performance overhead, you can disable telemetry and background services manually. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, then Diagnostics and Feedback. Turn off optional diagnostic data. Disable activity history. Turn off personalized ads. In Services, disable unnecessary startup programs and background tasks like Windows search indexing if you do not use it. But here's the bigger picture. This is not just about tweaking settings or installing a new operating system. This is about the future of PC gaming. For 30 years, Microsoft controlled the platform. They decided what features you got, when updates happened, and how much data they collected. Gamers accepted it because there was no alternative. Steam Deck proved that an alternative exists, and now Microsoft is scrambling to catch up. The question is not whether Microsoft will survive this shift. They are a trillion-dollar company with massive resources. The question is whether they can compete on user experience when they are no longer the only option. And based on current trends, the answer is uncertain. Your operating system does not just work for you anymore, it works for the company that built it. The difference is, now you have a choice. So here is what I want you to do. Pick one of two actions. First option, if you are on Windows, go into your privacy settings right now and disable at least one telemetry feature. Second option, share this video with someone who still thinks Linux gaming does not work. Drop a comment telling me which option you chose. And if you want to see more investigations like this, covering the tech industry's biggest power shifts, subscribe and hit the bell. Next week, I am breaking down another company that is losing control faster than anyone expected. You will not want to miss it. Microsoft spent decades convincing gamers they had no choice. Steam Deck just proved them wrong. Like, share, and subscribe so you're always first to know when big tech news drops.